Hey everybody, it's EJ from EYEDESYN.com, and today I got a really fun tutorial for you all about how you can control soft body dynamic inflations using fields. Let's check it out. So first things first, this was not my workflow idea. This whole workflow of how to use soft body dynamics and fields to control them was a workflow that was figured out by Josh Edwards, who is the art director at Buck Sydney. Super talented guy if you check out his site here. But he basically, we were talking on Instagram one day and he shared this technique with me and said, hey, you know what? You go ahead, share it with the world. So thank you to Josh Edwards for being so generous with his knowledge and allowing me to share it with all of you today. So give him a follow, give him a shout out. Josh is amazing and he's the major inspiration for this tutorial. He came up with everything. I'm just kind of conveying that information. All right, so let's start out by blowing up a simple, lowly torus here. Actually, toruses are pretty cool, or tori are pretty cool. Just gonna make this a little bit bigger. Now, some things to keep in mind when dealing with soft body dynamics, I'm just gonna go into garage shading lines, is you wanna have enough density on your mesh that we can get some really nice detail on our object when we start to inflate this with soft body dynamics. But the one thing you do not wanna do is have any intersecting edges. So if I had, say, another torus in here, okay, and we had these edges overlapping and we applied soft body dynamics to both of them, it's going to explode out, okay? So you don't want any intersecting geometry. You don't want anything that's even close to intersecting another piece of geometry or polygon or anything like that, because that's when you're going to get that fun little explosion and probably extreme slowdown in your viewport. So always be wary of that. No intersections, but we want to make this mesh just dense enough to like a little balancing act where we have enough detail for the simulation, but we don't have this super dense where it's going to really bog down our scene. And again, have our vertices so small so that they're very susceptible to intersecting with one another, okay? Because when we have a mesh this light, we can always go ahead and just add that into a subdivision surface and make that really dense. So you don't want to start this way. You want to keep it nice and light. So what I'm going to do is just make this torus editable by either hitting the C key or this little button over there. And we'll make that editable. And let's just apply a nice uber material to that. And let's get out of the garage shading lines. And let's go in, let's blow this thing up. So we're going to go right click, going to go to simulation tags, soft body dynamics. And I'm not really going to cover anything in depth as far as all these springs. If you want to know more about all these springs, be sure to check out my intro to soft body dynamics tutorial. I'll link it in the description. But basically, there's 3 spring type that control all types of the aspects of our vertices as they have soft body dynamics applied to them. They're made up of springs, and structural controls the actual base structure or base shape of our object, so it tries to maintain that structural integrity. Shear prevents shearing of the vertices or vertices from kind of folding over another, and flexion allows things to kind of flex out and kind of expand and grow, okay? So again, you can get more in-depth information in my other tutorial, but because we're going to basically leave these at default, I'm not going to cover these anymore in depth. Now, for inflating stuff, the main thing is going to be this pressure. We're going to bring this pressure up. And basically, this is going to just pump up our object here. It's going to pump up and it's going to fall. So we're going to go back to frame 0 and let's turn off the gravity in our scene. And we can do that by going to our Dynamics Advanced tab. And we're going to go to that by hitting Command or Control D and just navigate to your Dynamics tab. Go to General, and we're going to turn off the gravity, put a value of 0 in there, and we won't have any gravity pulling down our object. This is also, I want to point out, if you have anything kind of going funky in your scene, maybe polygons are exploding, up the steps per frame or maximum solver iterations here, and maybe we'll cover that a little bit later on, but it's there. This kind of solves a lot of problems if you have stuff exploding in your scene. But basically, we have our pressure going up here, and you can see that when we let this go enough, we have stuff like this happen. Okay, now this might be a good opportunity to go and up those expert tab settings because we got this stuff kind of exploding out. Or we can kind of dig into the other settings here. So volume conservation tries to maintain the original volume of that object. Now, notice when I tried to up that in the middle of the simulation, we had all this kind of jankiness happening here. Now that just is the nature of upping that while we have that simulation going. But if I go ahead and press play again, you can see with that volume conservation, just a small value of 3, you can see we don't have that kind of rogue polygons kind of flexing out and blowing up. So volume conservation is a very important thing when it tries to maintain that original volume when you have that pressure also acting upon it, okay? So very important setting if you have, you know, rogue polygons kind of blowing up all over the place. Again, a few little ticks of a value, like a value of 1, goes a very long way. So there's that. We also have stiffness. Now, this also tries to maintain the original shape of the object. Okay, so if we up that, you can see that we're trying to maintain that original shape. But if I hit play, you can see that because of these springs, we're getting these really cool kind of wrinkles in there. And this is basically these springs kind of taking into, kind of springing into action, pardon the pun there. The springs are springing in the action. But basically you can see that we have this really cool wrinkles. But again, we're having the exploding polygons. I warned you about them. And that's where we can either up the stiffness here or up the volume conservation, and basically that should hopefully tamper all that down. You can see we're kind of getting a little bit better there, but you know, like I said, a little bit goes a long way. Let's hit play again, and so I up the volume conservation too much. We're not getting those wrinkles at all. And maybe bring down the stiffness. So it is a balancing act for sure, okay? So I just want to illustrate that now. So this is all well and good. We have this really nice inflation. We tweaked our stiffness settings and our pressure and our volume conservation, and it doesn't look like we're having any exploding polygons, thank God. But you know, this is looking kind of cool. We got like a donut with some dimples on the inside. I don't know where I come up with these things. But if we place this in a subdivision surface, this is all nice and smooth, really nice. But this isn't really getting after what we ultimately want to do. We do want to inflate this, but we also want to control the soft body dynamic inflation using fields. Okay, so how can we do that? Well, in Cinema 4D R20, we have the ability to control vertex maps with fields. And if you notice in your soft body dynamic settings, we have all of these map little fields here. And that's where you can place a vertex maps to basically control the spring strength, the overall spring strength of your structural, your shear, your flexion, or your overall stiffness of your object, or all these springs. So that's really useful. So let's go ahead and create our vertex map, and it's actually very easy to do. We're just going to go to our character menu, go to the paint tool, and just click anywhere on your object. Just make sure your object's selected and is made editable. You need to make sure that this is editable, okay? So we just painted here, and basically what a vertex map is a range of 0 to 100% values of vertex strength represented by red and yellow. So whatever is red will have 0% strength of that vertex map, and whatever is yellow will have 100% strength. So we have these, you know, orange values in between, so it ramps up from 0 to 100%. Now, let's go ahead and let's just start painting just a few little stripes here, okay? We can also, you know, do a loop selection if we wanted to, and we can actually set vertex weight by going to select and going to set vertex weight. And you can say either 0% or 100%. And again, if you see 100%, again, is represented by that yellow, okay? So we have we have a vertex map. We can now go ahead and throw this vertex map into these map fields. So one thing that I found are the most important things to actually have being driven by a vertex map is shear, flexion, and stiffness, okay? So what I'm going to do is drag and drop the shear or the vertex map into the shear, into the flexion, and into the stiffness. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead, go back to frame 0 and hit play. now we have something completely different now, and it looks really cool. Looks like something that's inflated, but has all these kind of seams that are kind of holding it down. So what's going on here? Okay. Now, if you notice where we have yellow, we have more stiffness, and where we have red, we have less stiffness. Okay. So basically, what this is almost doing is masking out the soft body settings and allowing these other parts to inflate even more. So this vertex map strength is controlling the strength of the stiffness. Okay, now if I crank up this stiffness to say 50, what we should see is a little bit stiffer parts here that are being 100% affected by our weight here. So basically what's going on is wherever we have that 100% vertex map strength, we're getting that full value of 50 stiffness. We have that full stiffness. Wherever we have that red vertex map or 0% strength of the vertex map, we're actually removing all that stiffness away. So the stiffness is in essence 0. And that's where we get all these really cool abstract billowing effects or an intestine. So this is all well and good. We're painting vertex maps, but with Cinema 4D R20, we have the ability to use fields, which is awesome because beforehand, the only way you could really adjust vertex map was by painting, or if you wanted to get into like really geeky Espresso or Python or something crazy like that. That's totally over my head, but we have a much easier way to be able to manipulate and control vertex map. So we're going to use fields, so we're going to check that on, and we can get rid of this freeze layer. Now what I like to do is basically what we want to do is control and add strength and vertex map strength using a bunch of fields. So let's go ahead and just wipe everything out by creating a solid layer. And what the solid layer is going to do is take everything, all the vertices, to 100% strength of that vertex map. Okay, and let me just go ahead and let's just deselect that little ring loop selection I have there. So there we go. And there we go. We have 100% strength. So if I hit play, you're going to see that nothing's really going to move because we have 100% strength of our stiffness and our shear and our flexion. So you're not seeing that nice inflation that we had before. And there's the rogue polygon again. We'll just leave that for now. But basically what we can do now is say, let's add a spherical field. And what the spherical field can do is actually take away from that 100% value of the vertex map. So let me just drag and drop the spherical field. And let's just move this along. You're going to see nothing's going to happen. But again, we want to take away from that 100% strength. So what I'm going to do is change the spherical field from max to subtract. And now what you'll notice is we're taking away from the strength of the vertex map and we're getting that red, which means, again, 0% strength of that vertex map. So if we hit play now, we're going to have just this really nice explosion going on. And if we move this around, you can see we're controlling the inflation. We're removing the stiffness. We're removing those springs and allowing our vertices to just billow and blow up like this. Now, it looks like we have a heartbeat or something. Some weird stuff's going on. And that's where we can either control the overall strength of that, of how much we're taking away from that vertex map by adjusting the opacity value here. And maybe that will help a little bit. But after doing some testing, it's basically the thing that you want to do is tamper down how quickly these vertices are moving. You can see they're exploding out very quickly. Like we're already at frame 8. We're not even half a second yet, and we're already getting these vertices exploding out. So the one thing that's going to help tamper down and kind of allow us to more smoothly transition from 100% strength to 0% strength of that vertex map is by using a decay modifier layer, and that's going to smooth the value change up quite a bit. So again, we're taking away from strength. So we don't want to go maximum. We want to go minimum because again, we're removing strength. We're going from 100% strength to 0. And we'll just crank this up to say 98. Some weird stuff happens if you crank this all the way up to 100. So usually 98 is like the sweet spot before stuff becomes kind of janky. So now what's going to happen, if I grab my spherical field, this is going to inflate and it's going to be a little more smooth. We're still getting all this janky stuff, but you can see how we're getting this nice decay though as we're moving the spherical field out. We're still getting these values and they're slowly decaying back to that yellow color or that 100% strength of that vertex map. So let's go and tweak some of these settings here. So maybe we need to up the volume conservation here a little bit and hit play and see what's going on there. So still getting these exploding polygons. So one thing I've noticed is that when we have too much of a drastic transition between stiffness, it starts to get a little crazy. So let's maybe move the stiffness down a little bit from 50 to 35. And it's a little bit better. Let's go and crank up the volume conservation here and hit play. And nope, still not enough. So let's bring the pressure down. And again, like I said, this is a balancing act. And now it looks like we're getting those little things inflating. Our vertices are kind of, and we just went too far. So let's bring up the volume conservation just a little bit more and hit play. And that's, nope, still weirdness. So let's bring down the stiffness a little bit more. And again, the stiffness is what's causing these nice little wrinkles and ripples. So when you have too much stiffness, we're going to get more of those polygons trying to, expand out and explode. So stiffness is kind of one of the major causes of the weird polygon explosion as far as through my tests. Okay, now you're seeing that maybe the pressure is a little bit too high and we're still getting that. So again, these are the settings because I know when you apply this to your own model, you might run into these issues as well. So I just want to show you these features or the options that I'm covering to help prevent that kind of thing. Okay, so maybe lower the stiffness there, and we got something nice going on. And again, we can control the overall impact of the spherical field and how much vertex map strength we're taking away by this overall subtract. And you can see that we're adding a lot more of that subtraction, and again, we're getting this weird heartbeaty kind of thing. Okay, so yeah, just some things to avoid. So here we have some cool inflation, and again, if you add too much strength or take away too much strength, that's when it really starts to explode a little bit. But if you're just kind of going all over the place and you're inflating one side, but then you leave, this just goes back down to that 100% vertex map. All that stiffness comes back, and we have this really nice kind of bubbling, blowing up, and maybe that's exactly what you want. Because again, this looks like crap in our viewport, but if we throw this in a subdivision surface, this is all nice and smooth. If we take away our garage shading lines, this is actually, maybe a cool effect where we got this really cool bubbling happening. So that's really cool, all right? So there's plenty of ways to be able to utilize all types of different types of fields, like a linear field, to be able to control what side of your object is inflating and what side isn't. Because again, this vertex map is controlling how much stiffness is applied and how much flexion and shear springs are applied to different vertices, okay? So the less of these springs and less the stiffness, the more it can inflate, which is really nice. So let's go ahead one step further, and let's say we want to have this look like a true inflatable object here, where it has seams like an inner tube or something like that, okay? So what I'm going to do is let's just turn off the subdivision surface for now, and let's go to our edge mode, and let's just add some loop selection. So I'm going to hit U and then L to get a loop selection, and I'm just going to select this loop, hold down the shift key and select this loop there. We'll select that loop and this loop. So we got 4 loop selections, edge selections. So we're going to store that in a selection tag. So let's go ahead and go to set selection. That'll add this nice little edge selection tag. And what's cool about fields is we can drag and drop this edge selection into our vertex map field list. And now you can see that we're actually using those edge selections to manipulate the vertex map. So if you see what we have going on now, because right now this edge selection is just overwriting the spherical field in the solid layer. So what we should see is 100% strength here. So we have more stiffness here and less stiffness in red. So what we should see is the red part inflate and the yellow part stay stationary, and that's exactly what we see right now. Okay, so this is a cool way to be able to, you know, clamp down on certain parts of your object. If you had some cool like you know, parade blimp or something like that, you could really go to town on that and, you know, make a Snoopy or something and have the seams on the arms not inflate. So this is looking pretty cool, all right? But we need to add this to our spherical field, so we still want to use the spherical field to control what's being inflated and what's not. So what we're going to do is we're going to blend this edge selection with the underlying layers by changing this from normal to a max blending mode. And if I go back to frame 0, you'll see this will actually update. And what's happening is max is basically the lighten equivalent of, say, After Effects or Photoshop. So what it's going to do is it's going to take that lighter yellow color and lighten up anything that is darker or has less percentage. So we're going from 0 to 100%, so it's lightening it to that 100% value. So you can see as I'm moving the spherical field, and if I even grow the spherical field a little bit, you can see that that yellow is always going to be there because it's always going to lighten up that part of the geometry, no matter if we have a spherical field changing values around it or not. Okay, so now I can hit play, and let's get out of our vertex map here. And as I bring the spherical field over, you can see that we're inflating and we're getting these really nice seams here. You know, it's like we're making sausage or something here. Link's a sausage. But here we go. We got these really cool inflations. Okay. And basically, I mean, we could animate this spherical field and just trigger these soft body dynamics and really create some really cool abstract stuff. Or, you know, we have a torus with a butt growing on it, which it seems like it always likes to grow butt-looking things on objects. But this is kind of just hopefully giving you some ideas and inspiration on, you know, what you can do with soft body dynamics and vertex maps. So we have this nice edge selection here. We have the soft body dynamics kind of pinning down that area. Now, what if we wanted to create a seam? Well, a great way to model seams is to use a bevel deformer. So what I'm going to do is let's turn back on that subdivision surface to smooth everything out. You can see that we're not getting a seam so much as just like a smoothed out area. So let's go ahead and let's right click on our subdivision surface. Let's group these objects together, and let's just go ahead and place a bevel deformer here. And we're just going to make it a child of that null, so it's going to be the same level of hierarchy as our subdivision surface. And what we can do here is just drag and drop that edge selection into this selection area here. And what this will do is just bevel this edge selection. You're not going to see anything because this use angle is kind of overriding everything. But if I uncheck that, boop, you're still not going to see anything. But if we go and we offset this, you can see that, all right, something's happening here. Let's just zoom into right here. You're going to see that we are seeing a little bit of something, but the shape is round, so it's actually not going to make like a nice little seam very well. But that's where we'll go and make sure we have the shaping tab here open. If you want both to be open at the same time, both the option and the shaping, just hold down the shift key and select the shaping to add to that. And what we can do is take this shape from round to user. And here's where if we really crank this up, and let's just move this on up a little bit. Add some subdivisions here. See, we had no subdivisions, so we couldn't see anything. But once you start to add some subdivisions, now we're getting this really nice seam. And we can control this using this user profile spline kind of thing here. So this is like the profile of that bevel. And then we can just adjust the depth here. So how much that sticks out, as well as how wide that seam is. So if I bring this down to, say, let's do 1.5. We've got this really nice seam, and maybe just bring that depth down. And let's maybe make this a pretty seam like that. And maybe smooth that out by adding even more subdivision. If we zoom out here, we've got some pretty nice seam action going on. So again, this looks like a seam on an inner tube or something like that. So it just adds this really cool effect onto this. Okay, so we got the seam, we have the soft body dynamics going, we're controlling it right here. We can go ahead and maybe we add a let's add a random field. So add some noise. So this will randomize everything here. Maybe we'll just bring this down just a little bit. Okay, so it's just kind of randomizing the strength. And hopefully we should get more variety and organic kind of inflation because we're getting these little variations of values. So let's go to there's a random field. Let's place it below the decay. And actually that might have got rid of it all. Let's just leave it there for now. Let's go to the field. Let's change this to, we got noise. Let's just scale this up, okay? So we're getting this, hopefully this should create some really nice ripples. Okay, so let's see what that does. So we got the inflation, and so we should be getting more uneven inflating and create even more of these really nice wrinkles and or butts, if you want to call them butts all over your inflated object. So there you go. And we can even animate that noise so we have even more kind of variety here. Okay, so we can go to our field, bring the animation speed to 20% or something like that. That might be a little too fast, but who cares? And hit play. And maybe we, let's just make this very pronounced. So let's just really bring that up. And you can see that now we have these differing values of the vertex map strength, and we're getting some really cool results. Okay, so just really cool ways to be able to control this. And again, this is using animated noise. So that is, that should be interesting. Okay. So this is kind of scratching the surface of all the things you can do and experiment with fields and different types of fields to create your inflation. Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is controlling the stiffness of your shear inflection springs and the overall stiffness of your object, and removing stiffness and springs and allowing those other parts of your object that are having 0% vertex weight strength to really blow out and inflate via the pressure value we had set here. So this is one example of what you can do. I just want to cover some other examples of what you could do with this setup. So here's an example that I came up with where it's, you know, I keep thinking of those cool Nike commercials where you have like the tread inflating. So here, if I just stop this simulation and I go to my vertex map, you can see that I did some edge selections here in like a waffle grid kind of pattern. And everything else is going to not be affected because we got these seams here again with the bevel. And if I hit play, you're going to see that we're getting this really nice waffle inflation kind of thing going on. And again, this reminds me of like the tread inflating on the bottom of Nike shoes, because for whatever reason that you cannot do a shoe ad without inflating the tread on the shoe, even though in real life the tread does not inflate, because if it did, that would be kind of cool. That'd be fun to jog on. Some inflated little tiny balloons on your feet. So this is a little example. So again, you can have a lot of fun with doing your edge selections and limiting where that vertex map strength is as far as where your seams are. Okay, so here's another example, a few other examples from Josh. He went to town with all of these different examples, and one of the coolest ones I thought was where he was experimenting with using a shader field. And this is the only thing that's on here is a shader field. And you can see if I go to the shader field, he's using tiles and he's just animating which pattern is showing up. So let's go ahead and let's hit play. And so right now he's got the circles. That's what that looks like. And then he's got sawtooth, and that's what that looks like. Goes to a spiral. And we got this kind of weird, creepy kind of intestine shape. Again, there's intestine looking stuff all over the place. But that's another way to be able to manipulate vertex maps and see what happens when you apply it to your objects here, your springs and your stiffness. So here he has a few different values. Again, like a lower volume conservation, a higher pressure and a higher stiffness, and even lower flexion spring amount here. So always experiment with how many springs and how much stiffness and pressure, because you can get varying results here. So let's just say if we really crank the flexion up, we bring the stiffness up as well, and let's bring the pressure up, and let's see what happens now. Now we get a little bit different stuff going on. Let's remove some stiffness, and you see we have something completely different. So you remove the stiffness, you remove those little wrinkles that you get. Okay, so again, wrinkles when we bring that stiffness up. Okay, less wrinkles when we bring that stiffness down. Okay, in those seams. So when we remove stiffness, it's more like this globular kind of balloon inflation, which is kind of cool. So again, you can completely change the look of your soft body dynamics by what values you place in these very important settings here. Okay, so let's go to another example. Let's go to this breath. So this is a better version of my torus example, where Josh added a radial field to actually control the strength of the vertex map. So basically what a radial field is you can control a angle and then actually have this just automatically animate. So this will just kind of spin here. So you can see that the radial field is spinning, and we just have some inflation on the red part of our object here. And then to get some nice wrinkles, even more wrinkles, he added some displacers here. One that adds a little bit of wrinkles right around where the seam is. So you can see that he remapped that edge selection and added a curve. And you can see that the curve is basically just, color correcting that vertex map and just crushing these values a little bit more. So the only displacement is right closest to where that vertex map is. So again, if I show that, you can see that's where the vertex maps are, those loop selections. Okay, so that's a really ingenious idea there. And then he had just another displacer that just created some nice little wrinkles here as well. So just a displacer with some tiles. And again, if I increase the global scale, you can see that we get some really nice wrinkles all throughout this object. And that's what really adds some more realism and remove some of that perfection that you had with the try that I had, this original shape here. So again, if we just go and add a deformer, let's just add a displacer, and let's just place this in the same level of hierarchy as our objects. Let's go to our surfaces, get the tiles, and you can see some stuff going on already, but let's grab some lines and just change the color here. And let's blur out the grout, blur out the bevel, and let's change the orientation to V, and let's just bring the scale down. Okay, and we can even do this with noise too. But let's just bring the height down, and you can see we added some, again, this is looking even more like an intestine, but we have some really cool stuff going on. We can even do just some noise and just really crank up this noise really high. And let's see if we're doing this in the right direction. I don't think so. Let's do this really high, or this really high. Let's do 2D noise, and that should be more predictable. There we go. And let's shrink this down. So that's shrinking it down that way. Let's shrink it down this way. And again, oh, there we go. That's the stuff right there. Check out those wrinkles. So changing the texture space from texture to 2D. 2D is a little bit more predictable because you're kind of shrinking in the UVs at that point, and we got this really nice rippling going on there. So let's just maybe bring down the height, make that a little more subtle, but that just adds so much to this type of result of this inflation. Kind of simulation triggered by fields. So one last one, we're going to save the grossest for last. This is kind of taking the animated noise to another level. So again, the only shader that's on now is this shader with some noise. You can see that that shader is added to this. And if we hit play, you can see that that noise is animating and controlling those vertex values. And we get this really ooey gooey globby gross thing going on as well, which is kind of fun. So reminds me of those things that were filled with water. You know what those things, those little water tubey things? Someone out there knows what the heck I'm talking about. But yeah, this is so much fun to play around with. And again, if you have this in your scene and you just want this to be stationary, just remember all the old settings that used to go into, like the force, follow position, follow rotation. So this doesn't really drop, it just kind of floats in the air. And then, you know, bring the floor up to kind of move this and bump this up and down and stuff like that. So you can have other objects interact with this soft body dynamic object as long as you have a collider tag on those objects. So we can like rotate this and kind of bump that all over the place. And again, hopefully this is just, once I was shown this technique from Josh, and again, all props to Josh for allowing me to share this with everybody, but there's just so many opportunities to use this kind of stuff. And again, I always love finding ways to get Houdini looking effects in Cinema 4D, just because Houdini is such a popular thing these days. And I'm sorry, it's just too hard. It's too over my head. I can't do it. But being able to inject more life and control into all these older features, like soft body dynamics, like cloth dynamics that I showed in my last tutorial, where we can utilize Vertex Maps, control Vertex Map with these new fields in R20. It's just really, really exciting stuff and just so much fun to play around with, because it just injects so much more functionality to all of these older features that we can now dust off and really push them to the next level. So I really encourage you to experiment. And again, thank you so much to Josh Edwards over at Buck Sydney for sharing this technique with me and allowing me to share it with all of you. So be sure to give him a shout and have fun with this technique. All right, so there you have it, how you can control dynamics, soft body dynamics using fields and Vertex Maps. And hopefully this inspires you to create a lot of very cool soft body simulations inside of Cinema 4D. Now, if you have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, ask them in the comments section below. And be sure to check out that Intro to Soft Body Dynamics tutorial to get a little bit more in-depth information on all of those different types of springs and all that good stuff. And if you make anything using this workflow, please share it with me on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. Always love to see what you're making. If you like this tutorial, please hit that like button. If you like what I'm doing here on my channel, please subscribe. Really appreciate that. And as always, really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.